Forbes of the Forbes Family Farm out in Northeast Utah. And while my husband and I were not born farmers, we developed an interest in healthy eating and a passion for cooking. And we quickly realized that the best food that you can possibly make is used with the freshest ingredients, which are those that you can actually grow and raise yourself. So we started in the tiny little condo balcony that we had at the time. We turned it into a big container garden and started growing our own lettuce and strawberries, tomatoes, peppers, whatever we could cram into that little space. Eventually we moved out here where we started a farm so we could grow all of that high quality food for our own family as well as for our local community. So we grow over 70 varieties of fruits and veggies. We raise chickens, ducks, turkeys, pigs, cows, yaks, a variety of things out on pasture so we can make all of that meat available to our community also. And then a fun enterprise that we've started in the last 5 or 6 years is to actually have dairy cows. And so it's been really fun for us to really dive in and experiment with making cheeses, butter, yogurt, ice cream, of course, all the good dairy things. So today we are going to talk about how you can make your first wheel of alpine cheese, which is a hard cheese, similar to a Swiss or Gruyere, a really nice melty cheese. And we're going to do it using a clabber culture. So over the years, we've experimented using a lot of different types of cultures. So we've used the freeze-dried cultures. We've got into the art of natural cheese making and tried making cheeses using kefir or yogurt whey. So we've used a lot of different things. But at the end of the day, what we've come to really enjoy the most is using a clabber culture. So clabber is very similar to a sourdough in that you're actually just using the product itself. So in this case, we're using raw milk. And we're just continually feeding it every day, like you do with the sourdough starter, to then eventually develop a culture that we can use to make our hard cheeses. And so one of the things that I really like about using clabber is that A, you're not dependent on purchasing freeze-dried cultures over and over again, because those are for the most part a one-time use. There are some ways that you can save some of the whey and reuse it, but for the most part, you're dependent on purchasing cultures again and again. And then we just found pretty inconsistent results using some of the kefir. Maybe if we kept working on it, we'd get better and better, but I found really consistent results using the clabber. And so that is what we use almost exclusively at this point in our kitchen. It is also really nice because you can use it in place of both a mesophilic and a thermophilic culture. So those are different terms that you'll find in cheese making. Basically, if you're cooking your curds to a low temperature or a high temperature, but with clabber, you can use it for either. And so it's a great way to not, again, have to have separate cultures going. So let's start with how do you actually make a clabber culture, and then we'll dive into the cheese making. So to make a clabber culture, you have to start with raw milk. So even if you don't have your own dairy cow, you at least have to start the process with raw milk. So find a local farmer or a friend who has a cow. And then once your clabber culture is established, you can feed it using pasteurized milk. But to start, it has to be raw milk to get, again, all of the good bacteria and enzymes and all the components that you really only find in raw milk. So as I start a new clabber culture, I use only probably a quarter, maybe a half a cup in a clean jar, because this first round, as you're getting the clabber culture established, you're not really gonna wanna eat or drink it. I mean, you can, it's totally fine. It's not gonna hurt you. It just doesn't taste great yet. And so I don't wanna waste all of that good milk. So I'll start with a quarter to a half a cup, just in a pint jar. And then you just let it sit out at room temperature for probably 2 or 3 days. It's going to depend a little bit on your climate, your season, how warm it is in your house. But after about 2 or 3 days, you'll actually see the whey separate on top. So it'll be kind of that more yellowy green color, very liquidy compared to the solid that will be underneath it. And so when it hits that point, then you can then take a brand new clean jar, put again another quarter to a half a cup of that raw milk in it, and then you just take a teaspoon of the whey from that initial jar that you had started. So from then on out, you'll actually feed it every 24 hours, just again using a teaspoon from your previous culture into your new jar. And again, I'm just using 1/4 to 1/2 cup each time so that I'm not wasting all of that milk. And you'll feed it probably about 4 or 5 times. And at that point, then it's ready to actually use to start making cheese. So I know it's a little bit of startup as you get going. And then once you have it established, you can actually store it in your fridge for up to a week. And then you do need to feed it every week. So again, a lot of similarities between feeding sourdough starters, feeding your clabber. So as long as you're taking out and feeding it once a week, then it should maintain a great culture for you to use in your cheese making. So now that we've gone over the basics of making your clabber, let's dive in and start making our alpine cheese. So let's dive in and make our wheel of alpine cheese. So as I said, this is a hard cheese, so you will need to have a cheese press. There are tons of DIY options that you can Google and find, video tutorials and things of how to make your own, or you can purchase them. So I'll show you our press when we get to that section. But know that for a hard cheese, you are going to need a press. But other than that, it's pretty simple to go ahead and get started. So I like to take a big, heavy bottomed pot, just again, so that you have a nice consistent temperature. You're not gonna be burning or scalding the milk on the bottom. And I usually like to make a wheel with at least 4 gallons. I usually prefer to make it with 6 gallons. My cows didn't give me as much yesterday and today, so we're making a 4-gallon batch today. So I will take the milk from one day and put it into this pot and put it into the fridge overnight. In the morning, when I want to actually make the cheese, I will skim the cream off the top that has risen to the top in this pot, and then use that for making butter, ice cream, put it in coffee, whatever else. Because for this alpine cheese, you don't need it to be extra creamy. So if you're making something like a Gouda, you really want to keep all of that cream because you really want that creamy consistency. So for the alpine cheese, so we skim off the cream from the previous day's milk, and then I add today's milk to it, and I just put it straight into the pan. So I am not going to be separating cream. So it will get all the cream from today's milk and none of the cream from yesterday's, but all the milk from yesterday's milking. And so for us, that ends up being a great ratio. So it's a little bit of a drier cheese than like a Gouda, but it still has a really great creamy flavor and consistency to it. So once you put everything into your pot, then you do need to get it up to about 87, 88 degrees. And so if you do have enough dairy cows that you can just get 4 or 6 gallons straight, then just do it straight from the cow. You don't even have to save it from the night before. I don't have quite that quantity yet. And so I do need to then get this cooler milk up to that temperature that you'll generally get straight out of the cow. So once you get it up to 87, 88 degrees, which is what we're at here, then you go ahead and add your clabber culture and your rennet. And with this particular recipe, you add them both at the same time, which is nice. Often you let a culture set and then you add your rennet. This one you get to add them both at the same time. So I will take my clabber culture from yesterday, and so I'm gonna just kind of mix it up. It's pretty solid. I'm spilling it a little bit here. Not quite as thick as like a Greek yogurt, but it still has a nice kind of body to it. I'm gonna take out what I will need for tomorrow's clabber. So I stick it in here. And I will, again, probably take, I don't know, maybe 3 or 4 teaspoons to make that work with the rest of this pint jar. Then I will set this aside for tomorrow. And I'm making cheese frequently enough that I don't always stick mine in the fridge. I often will just feed it every day. If I'm going to have a really busy stretch or know that I'll be gone for a few days, then I'll go ahead and stick it in the fridge. And then I always find different uses for it. And so either we'll be using it to marinate chicken, just like you would with like a buttermilk chicken recipe, or use it to make a salad dressing or a ranch dip for the kids. Those are probably the things I use it for most often. And when all else fails, I give it to the pigs and chickens and they love it. So it never goes to waste in our house. So to make your clabber cultured alpine cheese wheel, you use about 1/4 cup of your clabber for about 1 gallon of milk. So again, today I have about 4 gallons in here, so I need about 1 cup This is maybe a touch more, so I'll leave a little bit in here and use that for something else. But I'll just go ahead and add that straight into this milk now that it's already at that 87, 88 degrees. Set that to the side. And then I have my rennet, and you'll want to dilute it in cool water. So you'll take about a 1/4 cup of cool water, and you'll use a 1/4 teaspoon of rennet per gallon of milk. So again, because it's 4 gallons, I have 1 teaspoon of rennet in this 1/4 cup of cool water. And just add that straight to the pot. And then I will mix it for 30 to 45 seconds, maybe a minute. So I will go kind of around in a circle, switch directions, go up and down in it. And that just makes sure that the culture and the rennet are really mixed throughout, and kind of throughout all levels and layers of the milk, so that you get a really nice, just consistent distribution throughout your milk. So once you feel like you've got it mixed in well, go ahead and put a lid on your milk. And that just helps you kind of retain some of the heat, make sure flies and other creatures don't get in. And then set your timer for a half an hour, and then we'll come back to check it and see if we have what's called a clean break, which essentially means that the milk has firmed up enough that it'll be time to move on to making curds. So this is a really nice time to kind of do your dishes, get your house cleaned up, go out and do some farm chores, whatever you need to do, and then get back in and to move on to the next step of making cheese. It's been 30 minutes and I wanted to bring you over here close to the pot so you could actually see what a clean break looks like. So you can take a knife, or I just use my finger, washed well, and then you just kind of go through and see if it breaks away cleanly. And this could actually probably sit even another 5 minutes or so. It's pretty close, but it's still a little bit looser than what I would want for a nice clean break. So we'll wait 5 more minutes and then we'll get started cutting into the curds. All right, it has been 30 minutes, maybe actually about 40 minutes, till we have a nice clean break. And so that means if you take a knife or your finger and you go through, it really just kind of breaks apart nicely. It shows that the cheese or the milk has kind of set and is firm. Now, one of the things I love about an alpine cheese is that when you go to cut it into curds, you don't actually have to be very precise. So with mini cheeses, you're cutting into 1/2-inch cubes and you want to keep kind of nice big curds. With alpine cheese, you just break into tiny little bits. So I'm just going to use a whisk and kind of just start whisking through to break it up into little curds. So we want to go all the way through to the bottom. You want to make sure that you don't have any massive chunks there on the bottom. I'm going to just break it all up into these little sections. You can kind of get more aggressive with it too. Really, you're whisking it. I also often like to just use my fingers. So let me get some of these curds out of here and I'll show you what I mean. So I've washed my hands and my arm really well, so it's nice and clean. But I will just reach in, and that way especially I can get to the curds that are on the bottom, because we want to make sure that those also get incorporated into these same smaller sizes. So when you take a handful, I'll show you this just for comparison's sake, you squeeze it and it just is coming out all over the place. In a little bit, we'll actually know that we're at the right consistency based on the cheese curds really starting to firm up and hold together when we do that little trick of squeezing it through our palms. So I think, kind of feeling around, I think we have all the major chunks kind of broken up here. Oh, there's another little one. So it's a nice kind of more or less pea size, even smaller than pea size consistency. And now I'm gonna just let it sit for about 5 minutes to let the curds heal initially. And then we'll come back in and we'll stir, which you can either do with your hand or a whisk or a spoon, for about 15 to 20 minutes until we get that curd consistency where we want it. So we'll let this sit for 5 minutes, then we'll come back in. Now that we've given those curds about 5 minutes to heal, we're going to continue to the next step, which is stirring the curds. And we are going to do this while we turn on the heat and get it up to about 105 degrees. So I'm going to turn on my heat, and you can actually go fairly high with this. So I'm going to go medium, almost even medium high. So currently, just so we kind of know where we're at in terms of a starting temperature, we are, let's see, thinking about it. Looks like we're right up around 87 degrees, which makes sense. That's about where we were at when we had added the culture and the rennet and we're letting it sit. So again, I'm just gonna use my hand in here because that really helps me make sure that I get all the curds broken up, especially on the bottom of the pan where the heat source is coming from, because you don't want to overcook the curds on the bottom and have them become then a different texture and consistency. You want kind of a consistent feel throughout. So I will just start kind of breaking up all of these curds, and we'll just do this. Again, it's gonna take 15 to 20 minutes or so. And as I'm going, kind of periodically, I'm gonna check the consistency by grabbing a handful of curds and then just squeezing it in my hand. So right now, again, you'll see they just squeeze out super quickly. When we get towards the end, again, that 105 is just kind of a benchmark to shoot for. Again, your milk is gonna be a little bit different, whether they're in they're on fresh grass or they're on hay, that all these little factors are going to influence things. So a lot of it is a feel over time, which I know is hard as you're a beginning cheesemaker, but you do get better with it as you go along. So we're going for around 105, which should take about 15 minutes or so. But ultimately what we're going for is the right consistency of the curds so that when I take a handful, it actually holds together like cheese. So right now, again, it is still super loose. It's not there, not even close to being there. And so we will go ahead and stir this, and then I will meet you back here when we are at that right consistency so you can see what that looks like for yourself. Okay, so I have been stirring this with my hand for the last, I don't know, probably 15 minutes. And I'm actually up to 108. So it's a little over the 105, but I think I'm finally at the right texture. So I want to give you a sense of what that looks like. So if I grab a big bunch of curds and I squeeze it, it really sticks together. Let me get a smaller bunch so you can see that a little bit better. So here's a bunch of curds. I'll squeeze it in my hand and it's sticking together. So you can see how it kind of is firm enough that it will stay together as I'm squeezing it. And so what I'll do now is I'll just kind of I'll turn off the heat, and then I'm just gonna kind of go through one last time to make sure nothing's kind of stuck on the bottom. And then I'm gonna let it rest for 5 minutes, because now I actually want it to kind of clump up a little bit on the bottom while I go and get my press, make sure I get it nice and washed, cleaned, ready to use. Now that the curds have sat, we will move them into the press. So I take a piece of cheesecloth, and actually this is cotton muslin, because many of the cheesecloth products that you see sold, especially if you're just going to your local grocery store or something, actually have holes that are so far apart that they don't really work very well for cheese making. So you can just go to the fabric store and get some cotton muslin, which is super easy. Or if you go to a cheese making supply store, then you can actually get good cheesecloth that you can use for cheese making. But what I will do, so oftentimes you'll see in recipes it says to pour off the whey, but with a pot that's this big, especially when I'm normally making a batch with 6 gallons of milk in it, it's super heavy and just a little bit clumsy. And so I found a better way to do it, which is super helpful. So you actually take your cheesecloth and you're going to essentially tuck it under the curds and pull it up and move them all into your press. So you'll want to have your press set up close so that you don't spill whey all over the place. And then I always put it in to like a nice big deep pan like this, because you will have a lot of whey coming out when you first put it in. So if you use a shallow pan, it's really not going to catch everything and you might have a giant mess on your hands. Even then, even with this, I will be checking it periodically and dumping whey back out to make sure I don't overfill it. So all that to say, let's gather up our whey. This is also why you want to make sure you don't have your milk coming all the way up to the top of your pan lip, because as you're putting your hands in to scoop it out, you definitely displace some liquid. And you know, from personal experience, I have ended up with whey all over the place. So kind of just go towards the bottom and scoop it up. Probably should have gotten a stool to stand on today. It's a little far from me. But you just kind of keep gently going, scooping it all up. All right, so I think I got it all in here. So generally, once I think I have it all, I kind of just hold it here for a minute in the warm way, because that again kind of keeps things malleable. And I run my hand along the bottom to see if I missed some curds. Oh, and right here I did, I missed a whole big chunk. So I'll just grab that chunk of curds that I had missed, shove it into my cheesecloth, very ceremoniously. Grab another little bit. Again, I'll just kind of run my hand along, see if I missed any curds, and I'll get them in. And if you do miss a couple, it makes a great little snack. I actually really enjoy eating these curds when they're warm, straight like this from the warm way. All right, so I think I got, 95% of my curds here. So then I will take my bundle, my little cheesecloth bundle. I'm gonna pick it up. I'm gonna let some of the whey drip off. I'm gonna move it over to my press. Now again, because it's nice and warm, it's still really malleable. I'm gonna take my cheesecloth and I'm actually gonna just kind of fold it over the edge of the press so that I can get as many wrinkles out as possible. Because anywhere where you have little wrinkles, you're gonna get crevices in your final cheese, which just is more likely to get, different bacteria or things kind of happening in that. So just kind of pull it as tight as you can. You don't have to be crazy about it, especially because we are going to turn this and flip it in about an hour or so. So we'll have another opportunity to kind of straighten out any of the wrinkles. So I got most of the wrinkles out. Then I'll take one side of the cheesecloth and I'll go across the top. Again, trying to just kind of flatten it out. I'll do one more batch to make sure I got all those curds. It's a little bit smaller than normal, but I guess that's because I'm just doing four gallons today rather than the 6 that I normally do. So we'll go ahead and put our follower in, and you want to try and just even it out as much as you can. You don't have to get out a level or something, but eyeball it, make sure it looks like it's pretty level. But because the follower now is below the edge of this cheese press, you'll need another little block or something so that when you're putting your weight and your pressure on, it has something to kind of grab to actually put that pressure on it. So then I'll put the rest of my press back together. And you can make a homemade press. I happen to get this really nice one from New England Cheesemaking Supply for Christmas a few years ago, and it's been awesome, and it's really met kind of all the needs that I have for cheese making. And so, okay, so now I have it basically set up, but you have to determine now how much pressure to put on it. And I'm gonna kind of squeeze out some extra whey, put the cheesecloth up so it's not just absorbing all of that whey. And you want to have the whey kind of just slowly and gently coming out of the holes that you'll see here on the side of your press. And so I will press down a little bit to make sure I kind of continually have some whey coming out. And then I'll put my weights on. So currently it's at about 10 pounds of pressure. And I'll let it do this for probably 10-15 minutes. And then I'll come check on it and probably put a little bit more pressure on it on the same side. And then an hour later, I will actually go ahead and flip the whole cheese over and put even more pressure on at that time. If you do too much pressure too fast, you're more likely to trap whey inside, which then eventually creates what they call mechanical holes, using the mechanism of the press to create that. And so, again, you just want it kind of gentle. And I hear it looks like it's kind of stopped having the whey come out. So even already, I'm gonna add a little more pressure just to make sure that whey is kind of slowly coming out the sides. The cheese has been in the press for about an hour now, and I did increase the pressure a little bit after 15 minutes. And now it's time to flip it entirely. So I will take it all apart again and then actually flip it so that we can get a nice smooth side on both sides. Because currently the side that's been on the bottom will be nice and flat because it's had all the kind of weight and pressure from all the cheese on top of it. But we want it to be nice and smooth on both sides. So I will basically just kind of take one side of the cheesecloth that I want to maintain as kind of my new bottom of the cheese, and I'm going to straighten that out, try and get out any of those wrinkles so we get just a nice smooth press on the bottom. And I just flip it over like that, because you'll see this side is really nice and smooth. This side's a little more jagged, and so we will go ahead and do this. Looks like I got a few curds that snuck out of the cheesecloth, so we're just going to dump those back into the whey pot. And it's nice. All of this whey will be great feed for the chickens and pigs. You can cook with whey also. I know often if you find some kind of more old-fashioned, old-timey cookbooks, they have lots of good recipes with whey. I'd say 9 times out of 10, I don't actually cook with it. I just give it to the pigs and chickens, but it's a great feed for them. So it's not like it's wasted. It just goes to our meat and eggs and makes our bacon better over time. So again, we'll have one side of this cheesecloth that we lay down flat across the top. We'll put our follower in. Again, just trying to get it nice and even and level as much as possible, and kind of reassemble it. And now we'll do, again, just kind of enough pressure so that we see some whey slowly trickling out. And we'll leave it like this for 24 hours. So we'll go overnight all the way into tomorrow, at which point then we will put it into a salt brine. So I will get this all set up for the night. Get it, for me, it's about 20 pounds of pressure is about when I start getting whey kind of dribbling out again. And then we'll get ready to do the next step tomorrow. After waiting 24 hours with our cheese in the press, it's time to move on to brining our cheese. So you'll go ahead and take it out of the press. Again, this was about a 4-gallon batch of cheese, so it will make a wheel that it is about 4 pounds. So you can count on roughly a pound of cheese for each gallon of milk. And yeah, so overall it looks pretty nice. I mean, there's a couple little wrinkly spots where the cheesecloth somewhat got folded in on top of itself, and that just happens. But we'll go ahead and put it into a pan. I like to put it in a pan and put my salt brine solution in here so that I can put a lid on it. Again, just depending on the time of year, if you have flies in your house, if you have a lot of livestock, you likely have flies, so you want to just kind of keep it protected. Now, to make your salt brine, you use about an 18% salt solution. And so I just weigh that out with grams as I'm doing it. And so for this particular batch, I made, I think it was about 350 grams of salt to 1,500 grams of water. And it is a lot of salt, but luckily you can reuse your salt brine. So in between uses, I just store it in the fridge and you can use it for months. If you do notice that anything seems off, obviously start over and just make a new batch of salt water. I do find also if I am flavoring the cheese, so if I'm putting in, red pepper flakes, for instance, I will have some that then come off into the salt brine. And since my kids don't love that flavor, if I do make a lot of flavored ones, then I will just make a new brine for kind of that new, next plain batch. But because they don't really like the flavored ones, I don't make them all that often, and so I just reuse the same brine. So I will go ahead and just pour this brine in, and you'll notice that your cheese will float, and you want it to be level with the surface of the water. And so you don't want it to be floating, bobbing up above the level of the salt brine. That indicates that you might have some contamination issues. You can have something called coliform, which in that case, you should throw that cheese out. It's not gonna be good for you. But if it's floating and it's level with the surface of the salt water, then you're just fine. But to kind of add a little bit of extra insurance on that to make sure it is fully coated, I just take a little bit of just a kosher salt here, and I just liberally sprinkle it across the top of the cheese. And so here the top of my cheese is covered. I'm not weighing or measuring that. I'm just covering the top of the cheese so that if any part is exposed at all above the surface, then it still has that salt kind of protecting it. You'll want to have it in the salt brine for about 5 hours per pound of cheese. So you can actually weigh your cheese if you want, or again, I know that this is a 4-gallon batch of milk. It's about a 4-pound wheel of cheese. So I'll need about 20 hours for this, which is gonna probably put me, I don't know, at not an ideal time for like middle of the night. And so I would err on the side of going longer rather than taking it out sooner. So I'll just get it out when I get up in the morning, and it's not a big deal if it's sat in here a little bit longer. I will probably, before I go to bed tonight, actually flip this cheese over so that the other side is then kind of fully submerged on the bottom. And again, I'll sprinkle salt on the top of this particular like new side that's up. Again, the salt is part of what is preserving it. I would always err on the side of over rather than under salting, because if you have a saltier cheese, you can always use that in cooking and things. I've never had it turn out where it feels and tastes too salty, but if you're not putting enough salt, that is opening it up for potential contamination. So I always just err on the side of being more liberal with the salt, as again, I'm salting it here, and as I flip it over, I'll salt the other side, just to make sure that it's a nice, safe, delicious wheel of cheese for my family to enjoy. So again, I'm gonna let this set 20, probably realistically 24 hours, and then we'll go ahead and take it out, and that's when we'll start drying it to get ready to age it. So we'll be back tomorrow. Now that the cheese wheel has sat in the brine for at least 20 hours, since this is a 4-pound wheel of cheese, it's time to take it out of the brine and to let it dry out. So it's a really simple step. Literally just take it out and set it on a plate. Now some people use like sushi mats and different things so it can kind of drain a little bit more. I found, if anything, it actually gets my sushi mats all moldy, so I don't do that. But you'll want to flip it 2 or 3 times a day. So periodically as I walk by, I'll go ahead and flip it over, because the moisture will gather on the bottom. So if you don't flip it over at all, you will start getting mold to develop on the bottom. And the goal of this step is just to let it dry out. So it'll probably take 2 or 3 days. Again, depending on the time of year and the humidity level in your house, it may take longer than that. It may take 4 or 5 days. And if you're in a really warm and humid climate, you might actually even need to put this into the fridge, because otherwise if it's too warm, it'll speed it up so fast that you just start developing, again, more of that mold or different cultures that you aren't wanting if it's going too fast. Here, it's pretty chilly out still, and so for us, it's easy for us to just let it sit out on the counter. I will go ahead and put a little cheesecloth over the top, again, just to keep bugs or any kind of unwanted items off of it. So I will just simply put a cheesecloth over it. I'll leave it out on the counter, and that way as I'm walking by doing other things in the kitchen, I can just flip it, and then I will show you what it looks like when it's ready to move to the next stage. We've come to the final day of our cheese making. So here is our wheel of alpine cheese that has been sitting out drying, and I've just had it on a plate and literally been flipping it 2 or 3 times a day for the last several days. And when I first would flip it, there would still be moisture collecting in the bottom of the plate. And on the first day, I actually just get a whole new plate because there's just so much. But after that, if there's any, I just kind of dump it out and let it kind of keep going and keep flipping it. But at this point, it's pretty dry. It's not, it's not 100% dry, but it doesn't feel moist at all. Kind of almost, I heard one person describe it as a clammy handshake kind of feel. And depending on how big your wheel is, you may need to actually cut it in half in order to get it sealed up properly. Because at this point, all we have to do is seal and age it. Now this is the piece that made a huge difference for me in successfully aging some hard cheese. Because in the past, I would try to kind of make things work as my own cheese cave. I used an old wine fridge. I tried to just put it in the basement. And every time I would end up with unwanted mold. I mean, there's some types of mold that you want in cheese making, but I would end up with kinds that I didn't want. So when I heard about vacuum sealing my cheese, it made a huge difference. So when it's to this stage, kind of that clammy handshake, just slightly beyond the clammy handshake dryness, then it's ready to seal. So I just put it into my vacuum sealer bag. We'll go ahead and seal it up here. It'll be loud here for a second, and then we'll come right back and I'll talk to you a little bit more about the aging process. All right, now the cheese is sealed in the vacuum sealed bag, and I often will actually just do a second seal at the top, just kind of an extra insurance, because they've had a few instances where I thought I had a great seal, and then a week or two later when I went down to the basement where I store it to check, I saw that there was actually air in the bag again. And if you do get air in the bag again, you'll probably develop mold on it. Now, depending on when you catch it, it might not be a big deal. So I've had a few where I caught it, probably within just a couple days or a day or so of it starting. So I just opened up the bag, either scraped off a little bit of the mold, or you can take like a cheesecloth dipped in whey, kind of clean the rind of it. Then you do need to let it dry again, but it'll only take a day since it's most of the way dry already. And then go ahead and reseal it. It might change the color of the rind a little bit because it will make it almost more like a wine rind washed cheese. So almost a little orangey, pinky tinge to it, but it'll still be fine to eat. So the beauty of the vacuum seal is that it does keep that air out and that moisture out. If you seal it a little bit too soon, so when it's not quite dry enough yet, it is possible that you'll get some whey developing on the edges here. Again, if you're checking your cheese kind of regularly, as I'm making it once or twice a week, I am then putting new wheels downstairs once or twice a week, so I kind of just check everything, make sure the seals are all working well, make sure there's not any whey developing. Again, if there is, you open it, you can drain that whey out, reseal it, and you should still be just fine with that cheese. So I do recommend always labeling it with the type of cheese. So this is going to be an alpine cheese, and it was made with clabber culture. So I'll put clabber on here so I know what it was, and I'll put today's date. And then something that I find really useful is putting a ready by date, because as you start making more hard cheeses, there'll be different lengths of time that you need to wait before you can actually try it. So some you might be able to try in just a month. Some you might need to wait, 8 or 9 months. And so you'll want to put a ready by date on here so that way you know when it's ready for you to start trying. So this alpine wheel of cheese is going to be ready to try in about 3 months. If you're super impatient and you want to just try it right away, you could probably try it after 2 months and see what it tastes like. If it's a little too rubbery, go ahead, just seal it back up again in your vacuum sealer, put it away for another month, and try it again then. Because as it continues to age, it will continue to develop more flavor, better texture, and so again, if it's not quite the way you want it when you try it early at like 2 months, give it another month, try it again in 3 months, and it will probably be that much better. So put the date here, and I will go ahead, and then I just store these in my basement. So it's pretty cool down there, maybe 50 degrees or so. And I just have a big shelf and I store them all on there. And I try to store them in such a way that the oldest ones, or the ones that will be ready first, are closer to the front so that it's easier for me to grab something out when I'm looking for a good wheel of cheese. So hopefully this has been helpful and gives you some of the confidence to go ahead and try it. And again, as you go to experiment with these things, be flexible, have fun, know that it's a process, and just really experiment and see it all as a science experiment. That's why it is helpful to write down, okay, this is an alpine cheese made with clabber culture, because let's say you want to try it again, but you want to try a freeze-dried culture. Then you have the option to do that. You can perhaps use a yogurt whey. There are different cultures that you can use to experiment with your different cheeses. And they'll each give you a little bit of a different flavor. Some will be more the flavor that you like and that you're looking for. Some might not be, but a lot of that is personal preference too. And so it is fun to explore and experiment, to dive right in. And I do think that having a clabber culture is such a fun way to really make it unique to your own house, because all of us have different things floating around in our environment, and that clabber culture will just continue to develop a richer flavor that again is unique to your own place. So have fun and enjoy your wheel of cheese. Now comes the best part. You actually get to try your cheese. Now with your alpine cheese, you do need to let it age for at least 3 months, which I know requires patience and is tough. That's one of the hard things about making hard cheeses, is that you do have to wait a while before you actually get to enjoy the results. But believe me, it is worth it once you get there. And it is one of the best ways to preserve your milk. I know as farmers, we're always looking at how do we preserve the harvest, because we know we can't necessarily eat all of it in season. And we know that there are several months throughout the year where we can't be growing or harvesting the things that we would want to be eating. And so one of the great ways to actually preserve your dairy is to make butter, which you can do with the cream that we skimmed off at the beginning, and then to make cheese, and hard cheeses in particular, because there's a much longer shelf life. And so this alpine cheese that we'll actually cut into here now is about 5, maybe even close to 6 months old at this point. And so I brought it up. Again, I took it out of the vacuum seal, and the vacuum seal for us here in our climate has been a game changer in terms of really being able to preserve cheese well for a longer period of time. And so then we'll just kind of cut into it, and you can see a little bit about the texture. And one of the things about making raw milk cheese is that if anything is going to go wrong, you're going to notice it, particularly within the first 60 days. So if it has aged longer than 60 days and you go into, cut a slice and it smells good, you know that you're fine. So that is, again, one of the beauties of something like an alpine cheddar or alpine cheese is it's gone for 3 months. And so you know that you're kind of past some of that danger zone, because if there was anything wrong with this cheese, when you took it out, you would know it, and it would look and smell off, and it wouldn't be appetizing. Your body wouldn't want to eat it. So this, you can see, has a nice kind of not rubbery texture, it's a flexible texture. In fact, if you cut into your cheese and it seems like it's still too rubbery, I would just seal it back up and try it again in a few more weeks, because the flavor does continue to develop and the texture develops over time. And so I know, especially with that first wheel that we ever made, we wanted to cut into it, at 3 months exactly and be ready to enjoy it. But now that we've built up a little bit more of a supply, we often do wait until 5 or 6 months, because I think it does just have just improved flavor over time. And so you can see there are a couple little holes in here. So as I talked about in the pressing section, sometimes you can create mechanical holes, so holes made by the mechanism of pressing, if you are pressing too hard, too fast. And so it really is best to go gentle at first and then add a little more pressure, because otherwise if you're pressing too hard, too fast, you can trap some whey inside, which is then what ultimately makes these little holes. But I don't think it's a huge deal. It doesn't really change texture or flavor in any significant way. And so we still like to enjoy it just as it is. So it's great, obviously, for just, cheese and crackers. It melts really well. So it is a great cheese for grilled cheese or for making macaroni and cheese. A lot of maybe Italian dishes where you're wanting to have some really good meltiness in your lasagna or whatever it is that you're making. So alpine cheese is a great cheese. I personally think it's one of the easiest hard cheeses to get started with, because it really has pretty few steps, kind of all things considered in the world of hard cheeses. And I love that you can make it with a clabber culture. So you don't have to go out and buy any freeze-dried cultures. It's something that you can make right in your own kitchen. And it really then does become adapted to your environment. So it's your own unique style of alpine cheese. And I hope that you enjoy your cheese making adventures. There are also a lot of options to add different flavorings. My family, my kids in particular, really just love the plain, kind of simple alpine cheeses. We have added red pepper flakes or cumin seeds, and you just add those during the stage right before you press it. So as your curds are getting in there and starting to settle before you wrap them up and put them into your press, that's a great time to go ahead and mix them and incorporate them so they really get evenly mixed throughout before you put it into the press. But again, I hope you get to enjoy this. Here on our farm, we are so passionate about helping people really take all the goodness from the farm, whether you're growing it yourself or you're sourcing it from a local farmer or rancher, from a local dairy, and really being able to kind of bring that to life in your own kitchen. So we have a ton of resources on our website, theforbesfamilyfarm.com. or theforbesfamilyfarm.com. We have a lot of great courses. Many of them are video based, so you can actually come out into the gardens with us or into the kitchen so you can see what we're doing as we are really learning how to cook farm to table in our own homes. We have great classes on how to preserve the harvest, where we go over many of the main preservation methods and techniques, things like canning and freezing. Then we also really go from seed to plate, which is one of my favorite things to do, is to teach people how to grow things like cucumbers, tomatoes, green beans, and how to then care for them in the field and then bring them into your kitchen and get some great inspiration for new dishes that you might want to make. So we hope that you come along with us on this adventure. You can get our free farm to table guide, which kind of kicks you off and gives you some ideas of how to incorporate more of those veggies into your diet. And then we continue to have great information all throughout the year, really to get you eating farm to table every day in your own home.